bi-weekly webinar series. It is selling storage and solar. So we are going to go over all of our storage options, what a storage project looks like, and have time at the end for a Q&A session. So, my name is Mark Lennox. I am the Product Education Manager here at Freedom Forever. We host the bi-weekly webinar series. At the conclusion of this webinar, we will take a copy of this and upload it to Lightspeed in the video library. In the Lightspeed video library, you can find versions of all of the previous webinars we've done. So we encourage you to always visit the video library in Lightspeed after we conclude these webinars, so you can go back and watch the content that we've built for our training platform for our Pro Class series. So let's go ahead and talk about the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to start off by talking about the different storage options and what adders are available for those storage options. Then we'll for a storage project. We'll do a deep dive into how to manage storage in Lightspeed, how to work in Aurora, and how to work in Sunrun. Then on the wrap up, we'll start talking about the net billing tariff in California and how solar impacts those projects. And again, we will have a Q&A session. And during the Q&A session, we have stakeholders from the electrical side, as well as Rob Angel and Brian Malott and myself to answer whatever questions weren't addressed during the webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. So first, let's talk about the storage options that we have available and what adders could happen to the project if it goes beyond the basic structure of a storage project. Our current storage options are as follows. The first one we're going to talk about is the Solar Edge Energy Bank. The Solar Edge Energy Bank has a battery size of 10 kilowatt hours. The usable storage of that battery is 9.7. The remaining 0.3 is the auxiliary power required to recharge it in the event that it's completely bottomed out. It has 5 kilowatts of continuous power. Now the price for the Solar Edge Energy Bank, which is included on the adder sheet, is $12,000 for the first battery and $7,000 for each additional battery. Our second storage option is the Tesla Powerwall 2. The battery size for the Tesla Powerwall 2 is 14 kilowatt hours. It has a usable storage of 13.5, the same continuous power of 5 kilowatts. The price for the Tesla Powerwall is $14,000 for the first battery and $9,000 for each additional battery. So what are some of the different? The Tesla Powerwall 2 is an AC coupled device. Now, an AC coupled device means that it has a higher power output on AC, but it is less efficient over time. Because of that, and the ability for it to have multiple landings, if there is a great deal of landings for the Powerwall, it does increase the chance of needing a main panel upgrade to support the multiple landings. The Tesla Powerwall 2 can work with either Enphase or our Solar Edge inverters. Now, the Solar Edge Energy Bank is a DC coupled device. A DC coupled device is more efficient, but has a lower output of power over time. It is limited by the output of the inverter, and with a Solar Edge Energy Bank, because it's a Solar Edge product, it's built to work only with Solar Edge inverters. So you can't use Enphase with this. If you go with a Solar Edge Energy Bank, it will have a Solar Edge inverter. Some more continued differences between these two products. A Tesla Powerwall 2 is better for a whole home backup, has a larger capacity, and if you take into consideration that the Tesla Powerwall has a larger capacity, 13.5 kilowatt hours versus 9.7 kilowatt hours, the Tesla Powerwall is a little more effective at a price per kilowatt hour. Now, the Solar Edge option is a better option for a partial home backup or if you're using it for arbitrage only. We're going to talk about arbitrage only options later in this webinar and talk to you about how that works and what that is. Solar Edge is better for arbitrage only if you're intending to maximize that time-based pricing for a state with like net billing tariff. Tesla Powerwalls can do arbitrage too, but typically, if it's an arbitrage only option, Solar Edge is the way to go. So let's talk for a few moments about what additional adders can be associated with these battery projects. So battery projects, there's a bunch of additional adder items on the Adders Resource Center, and check out the pricing for these items individually. But some of these additional adders include additional sub-panels. So one of the cool things about the Powerwall and the Solar Edge Energy Bank is that built into the cost of that first battery is additional the first two sub-panels. So the first two are included. But in an instance where there is a third, if there is a 200 AC line disconnect, that adder is one of the ones that will be added to the adder sheet. Now, if this is a severely complicated install, like an inaccessible panel with like 10 plus connections, there could be some adders associated by bid for an extremely complicated install. The other two adders that are on the adder sheet is if there are bollards placed around the battery option, or if you choose to have our wall connector installed at the time. So, in the event that someone has a electric automobile, an EV, and they want to build in the wall connector into the costs, that's an option as well. Again, refer to the adder sheet to find out the prices of all these options. Okay, we're going to move on now to timelines and expectations for storage projects. So a couple things that we need to talk about are, how are install times impacted by adding storage to a typical panel system? So first, every AHJ is different. So install times and permitting can be impacted by adding batteries to a solar install. AHJs ultimately set the time of how long it takes for this to happen. So depending on the product chosen, the additional load may require an MPU. We are adding significant electrical loads to a property. So in those events, if there's an MPU that's added to a project, any kind of work that requires additional subcontracting will extend install times. Now, we did some research on the back end, and on average, the average project with the battery included takes 77 days to install from time sold. But again, every AHJ is different, and install times really do depend on the AHJ where you're located. So this will vary from region to region. And some markets, they average as little as 53 days, but some markets, they average into the 90s. So it just depends on where you're located, but the average over the entire company is about 77 days. So let's talk about setting the expectation then, if we now understand those install times. If you want a whole home backup, at a minimum, 2 batteries are required. The larger the energy profile, obviously, the more batteries are needed to power a whole home situation, meaning the house is completely active in the event of a power outage. So it's almost impossible to do a whole home backup with just one battery. So setting the expectation that if someone intends to back up their entire property, they will need, at a minimum, 2 batteries. Now, when you look at the adder sheet and we talk about the previous slide, the first battery has a higher cost than the additional batteries. That's because the first battery includes the controller and most of the electrical work costs that go with the project. Now, again, we did say if there's complications or additional adders that are required for the electrical work that goes along with a project, those will be added to the scope of work. But the typical electrical costs are built into that first battery. Anything really beyond that first battery has minimal labor and material costs, so it's just paying for the actual battery itself. Now, inventory at the time of this webinar is not an issue. Batteries are available. Freedom has allocated resources to ensure that battery projects have the materials necessary. So, at the time of this, there are batteries aplenty to go around. The one difference we do want to talk about is that a battery project really does require additional training for our install teams. So when scheduling install, it's important to set the expectation with the homeowner because specific training crews are required to install these types of projects. So the crew has to be trained on how to install these power walls. So if that crew is being assigned to a project, we need to set that expectation with the homeowner that this is the availability for the crew with the ability to complete this project. Okay, for the next portion of this webinar, we're going to talk about the different storage platforms, meaning how do you interact with storage in Lightspeed, in Aurora, and in Sunrun. So the very first thing we're going to look at is how to interact with storage in Lightspeed. Now, when you log into Lightspeed, you can use the Lightspeed Storage Guide as a planning tool for your storage projects. On the left-hand side on the dashboard, click Storage Guide and use this tool to assist the homeowner in planning items that would be backed up with their storage system. Obviously, the more circuits chosen in this platform will determine how many batteries you need. This is not the most accurate of, it's not going to choose like the system size or be able to adapt to the system size, but it gives the homeowner an idea that if they're looking for whole home backup and there are additional circuits like AC units or electric dryers or ranges, that can increase the amount of batteries needed. So it's also a useful tool, and this is something that is part of the project generator as well. So one of the steps in the project generator is, did you add storage to this system? You click yes, it will bring up the storage guide where you can choose the different circuits and things that you want backed up in the event of a grid outage. So later we'll talk about the document that is generated in Lightspeed when you choose these different options. So this is what the storage guide looks like when you're in Lightspeed, whether you're doing it directly from the sidebar and navigating the home pages of Lightspeed, or during project generation when you're letting Freedom know that there are batteries attached to this project. So what about the tools for when you're in home? How does that work? So in Aurora, you can open up the storage page by clicking on the slide editor tool. So if you click on the drop down in Aurora and click edit, you'll be able to turn off and on the different slides you want in your presentation. And right past your system design is the option for storage. So if you turn this tab on, it will allow you to choose the Tesla Powerwall 2. So it's going to get updated to include the SolarEdge Energy Bank, but right now you can demonstrate how many Powerwalls you need and what appliances or essentials or whole home is backed up. So on the bottom left, you'll see the output, meaning how much output is generated from however many batteries you choose, and the capacity. So this is the Tesla Powerwall. 2 batteries would hold 27 kilowatt hours and would have 10 kilowatts of output. So you can see based on the system size that I've designed with 2 batteries, that would keep the essentials going for 7+ days. It would keep the appliances going for 7+ days. And in a whole home backup where everything is covered, it would only last about 0.6 days on those 2 batteries based on the system size. So based on the design that you create in Aurora, the amount of batteries will let you know how long the whole home backup or the appliances or essentials will be covered. So that's the Aurora tool for going over storage options. So how does this work in Sunrun? Well, Sunrun projects do give you the option to add batteries in states where they're applicable. In order to turn those on, you'll scroll down to the bottom of the design page and choose partial or whole home backup to differentiate between the two battery options. So clicking partial home upgrade, you'll see Solar Edge battery, whole home backup, you'll see Tesla. The states that currently allow batteries for Sunrun are Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Connecticut, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Texas. So if you're in one of those states, you will have these options at the bottom of your design pane when you're in the process of designing a system in Sunrun Splat. So earlier we talked about the backup storage disclaimer. When you're at project generation and you've chosen a battery for that project and notified Freedom that there is a battery included in this system, one of the DocuSign documents that's generated is the backup storage selection disclaimer. This will show the quantity of the battery, which battery you've chosen, and what loads or items that were selected in that process so that we can get on the same page with the homeowner. If this isn't correct, the homeowner can point out, oh, there are a couple other things that they wanted, and you can generate this document again in Lightspeed. All right, the last thing that's on our agenda today is to tie this all into the net billing tariff and how storage is impacted by that. So if you haven't watched our previous two webinars, we did somewhat of a surface level, here's what's coming with NEM 2.0 about a month ago. Last week, at the end of February 2023, we did a real deep dive into the ins and outs of our NEM 2.0 sunset frequently asked questions. And there is some information in there about batteries. And we also encourage you to look at that NEM 2.0 sunset document so that any questions that we haven't answered here, or that were for the information we're about to show you, that you do get that addressed prior to it being completely sunsetted. So the net billing tariff, what is it and how does it impact homeowners who don't have storage? So we're going to focus here on California because California will no longer have net energy metering. NEM is replaced with this net billing tariff. We have historically referred to this as an export rate. So the key change here is that customers no longer receive retail energy credit for the excess energy that they produce from their rooftop solar. Instead, they're given credit for that excess energy in real time based on the hour and on the day and the month of the year. And if you average it out, it averages about 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a drastic reduction in what that power used to be worth. Again, the reason why this is important is because storage helps mitigate some of these export rates. Export rates will vary by month and hour and weekday and weekend. And we have an example on the next slide that will show you it's not like the most accurate in terms of like the current look of the export rates, but it gives you an idea of what the export rate chart looks like based on the day, the month, the hour. So again, one of the ways to combat these major changes of the net billing tariff is to add storage to a solar panel system. There are a couple of different options for net billing tariff. We've discussed in great detail what these whole home backup options are with the Solar Edge Energy Bank and the Tesla Powerwall. And we're going to talk to you about arbitrage and what that means. So before we do that, this is an example of the export rates, and you can see over a 12-month period, the hour of the day, what you would get paid for power, depending on the time of the year and the hour of the day. And this doesn't include any of the adders that are given to you from the utility. One of the rare occasions where an adder is actually a positive thing, the utilities will add to this for the first 5 years. And again, we discussed that in the previous webinar. We're not going to spend too much time on this. We do encourage you, if you need to know way more about NEM 2.0 sunset and the net billing tariff, I encourage you to go back and watch last week's webinar. So you can see by the chart that on the 18th and 19th hour in September, the energy is far more valuable than, say, if you were trying to produce it during the 14th and 15th hour of April. The export rate is virtually nothing or is nothing at that time, but on the 17th and 18th of September, it's more than $2.50. So that's where your energy and your storage system comes in, whether you're doing whole home backup or intend to take advantage and leverage your storage system to arbitrage that power to get it at peak. So, based on the example on the previous slide, adding battery storage allows you to charge your battery outside of peak hours when electricity is the cheapest. Energy arbitrage means storing this energy for use during peak hours and guarantees cheap electricity prices throughout the day. So here is the difference between whole home storage versus arbitrage only. And again, Solar Edge and Tesla Powerwall offer the ability to do both. If there is a product that has arbitrage only, the key thing you need to know here is that an arbitrage only system has no storage. You cannot back up a home in an arbitrage system. It's a DC coupled system for efficiency that maximizes self consumption, and it is built solely for the purpose of that time based exported. Meaning you're using this arbitrage system to leverage your power to sell it back at the time where you get the most bang for your buck. A whole home storage system has backup options for power outages, meaning these batteries you attach to the home can power the home for chunks of time in the event of an outage. There is also a self-powered mode, meaning after the sun sets, you can run your home off of those batteries until they're exhausted, and then it switches back over to grid power. With these battery systems, there is the possibility to take advantage of these time of use settings and allow for that time-based exporting. That's when it's attached to a solar panel system, you are able to arbitrage the extra power that you generate and export it back at a time where you get the most bang for your buck. Not to keep using that phrase over and over again. So again, just to hammer this point home, an arbitrage only system does not give you any home backup. It's zero storage. It's only there to mitigate some of the issues that come with an export rate situation. Okay, so now we have reached the point in the webinar where we're going to start our Q&A session. We are joined by Rob Angel, Brian Malott, Matt Markham, and Eric Kaneko. Matt and Eric are part of our electrical team. They're going to focus on all of the electrical questions, and then all the other general questions, myself, Rob, Brian, will handle those. So let's get to that Q&A session now. All right, so we're at the Q&A portion, so we have your questions coming in. If you don't see the Q&A, you'll probably need to scroll down a little bit. There's an option on your page to submit questions. So we're going to start the process. I'll send those to the screen here momentarily, and we'll get going. So our first question is from Greg, and I'll send that to screen now. This question is for Rob. Between battery costs, Mosaic dealer fees, is it going to be realistic to be selling savings to customers?
Yeah, hey guys, morning, afternoon. So it's a complicated question. I think short answer in most areas is going to be no. I don't want to say that with certainty though, because of course there's many factors that are involved in whether somebody's going to have savings. Of course, their current utility rates, kind of, how you're pricing the system, what the post-solar billing method looks like. There's a lot that goes into it, but I think generally, if you're outside of California, at least, I would expect the answer to be no in most situations. Think of it this way: if you're adding one Powerwall to a project, and you essentially price it to account for the dealer fee, and you're selling it on a 25-year 3.59% loan, that's going to end up adding about $75 to the loan every month. And so, depending on how you're pricing and how much savings was there to begin with, and whether you're getting any savings as a result of adding the battery, you need to be able to absorb, $77 worth of extra monthly cost. And so, in most areas, most states, most utilities, that's going to push you over, and you're going to have negative savings, or you're not going to save anything. So, in most areas throughout the country, you're paying a premium for resiliency, as they call it, for backup, for the ability to have power when the grid goes down. And most customers, I think, understand that, and most customers that want batteries are okay with that. When we start getting into the conversation about arbitrage, that is a very different conversation, and I think we'll get more into that in the Q&A here. But in an arbitrage scenario, you want to get essentially the least expensive battery, and the only reason it's there really is to create savings. And so in those scenarios, again, you're typically going to be a lower cost battery, and basically what you're trying to do is avoid buying power at peak rates, or in certain instances, like what's going to be coming up in California, you want to be exporting in peak rates to where you're going to get the highest export rate. So the arbitrage offering is, again, more of a savings kind of approach. But even then, we do need to see the cost curve of batteries come down over time for it to get more and more attractive over time, which, as batteries expand, we are going to expect to see. So a little bit of a loaded question, I think generally no, but in certain situations, yes.
Thanks, Rob. Next question is going to be for Matt, and it is: how do you determine how many batteries a homeowner would need based on consumption to avoid exporting energy to the grid under NEM3?
Yeah, this is also a very complex, situation. There's quite a few people working on calculators that take all of the, various utility rates into account. But really, fundamentally, what you're looking at is if you have a PV system that's producing, say, 30 kilowatt hours a day over, between the time 9 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock at night, and the customer is only consuming, say, 20 kilowatt hours of energy during that same time, well, then the delta 10 kilowatt hours traditionally would go out onto the grid. You would get net metering, credits for that energy produced. In this case, we're trying to capture that energy to release it where it's more advantageous financially. So looking at the customer system, looking at their usage patterns, again, it's very complicated. We're looking at ways that we can potentially incorporate that green button data to be accurate with it. But that's going to change throughout the year, summer, winter, day over day. So we're going to have to kind of look at what a median is, how do we capture as much of that energy as we can to take advantage of it later.
And just to add on to that one piece, if I could, we spoke about this a little bit in last week's or last webinar rather. But one of the big changes you're going to see in California, and that you do see in some utilities throughout the country today, that's a big shift from I think what a lot of you are used to out there, is when you start getting into batteries and export rates and the new net billing tariff in California, the time of the day matters a lot, right? The daily usage matters a lot. When you're on a net metering scenario, it doesn't matter as much. And it has in California because you have the forced time of use rates once you go solar. So it definitely plays a part, but not as much. And so, one factor that we're going to continue to learn about over time as we kind of collectively, learn how to sell in a world of a net billing tariff and export rates is, how do we account for that daily usage curve of a customer? What kind of user is the customer? What appliances do they have? What is their schedule like? When are they using power? And that's going to factor into this conversation with batteries and really with savings. So, just a note there, we'll talk about that more as we go, but that's going to be a really important factor to keep in the back of your heads as you're talking to customers in the new world, so to speak.
Thanks, guys. This next question is for Brian. What do you do if you don't use Splat, but instead use the partner portal for Sunrun?
Thanks for the question, Greg. So when you are in Partner Portal, when you go to navigate BrightPath, once you get to the design page there'll be a toggle where you can toggle on and off either PV only or PV plus storage. And so then from there, when you see the designs, you'll be able to toggle off toggle on and off certain options, and that'll show you the system along with the battery that you're toggling on.
Thanks, Brian. This next question is for Matt, and that is, if we add a battery to an existing installed system, does the storage unit utilize both the new and old PV system?
Yeah, so that's going to it's going to depend on how we physically tie it in, which is going to depend on the total PV to battery ratio. So each of the storage systems we use have a maximum ratio, whether it be 1.7 or 1.7 or 2 from a DC to battery ratio. So if the total PV system, the original and the new one, fall within that manufacturer ratio, then we can connect both systems to that battery. If for some reason that is outside of that ratio, we would have to separate those and isolate the original or even the new PV system from that battery to not exceed that ratio.
All right, thanks, Matt. Next question is for Rob, and it is, since batteries in California will soon be paired with nearly every solar project, will batteries be moved to part of the net system cost so reps can make commissionable money on the batteries sold?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think, at least right away, that batteries will be, quote unquote, like included in the base cost of solar. It's still going to need to be accounted for on a per unit basis. So I foresee there always being some sort of kind of adder with batteries. I don't know that that's ever going to go away, since again it does vary. Even with system sizes today, you kind of custom choose your system size, and that impacts the price. So I think there's always going to be an adder for batteries. But in terms of making margin on batteries, so to speak, I mean, again, I think it's important to say that just because something's the adder, that's not necessarily what you have to charge for it. If you wanted to, you wanted to charge $15,000 for a $14,000 adder and make some margin on that, there's nothing stopping you from doing that. Ultimately, that kind of end pricing is in your hands, so to speak. So, yeah, that's what I would say. If you wanted to upcharge it and add some margin there, you could, but I foresee there being adders on batteries for at least the foreseeable future.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Our next question is more of an electrical one, so I'm going to let either Matt or Eric take this one. For homes requiring a GMA line side tap, batteries will not work, correct?
Eric, you want to take this one?
Sorry, yeah. For the California, for like the meter socket adapters, the battery in a backup configuration is not allowed. I need to speak with the utilities, but initially they had years ago approved the battery to be installed as long as there's no loading behind that. So in this scenario, like the arbitrage only scenario, the battery is serving strictly as a power source, and it's not going to be disconnecting from the grid. So I will talk to the utilities and just get like a formal approval from them, and then we can send out an update on that.
All right. Thanks, Eric. All right, let me grab another question. Bear with me for a moment. This next one is from Erickson, and it is, will the system turn off during a power outage if you have batteries for arbitrage only? Who wants that one?
Yeah, I can take this one, and maybe we'll take another minute or two and talk again, kind of more about arbitrage. I see a bunch of questions coming in more about arbitrage. So just to re-explain what arbitrage is, again, you have no backup capability in an arbitrage only setup, right? So there's no automatic transfer switch or gateway that's going to create kind of a microgrid, so to speak, and be able to power your appliances in the event of an outage. Okay, so I think that is the key difference between a backup installation and an arbitrage only installation. The purpose of arbitrage is to daily charge your battery and discharge it daily. Okay, so pretty much every day you're cycling that battery. You're charging it, again, typically in the peak of the daytime when you have the most sun, any excess that your house doesn't need is going to be used to charge your battery. And then as the sun goes down, getting into the evening hours, 5, 6, 7, 8 p.m., typically your battery is discharging and powering your house, or in some cases, exporting to the grid, depending on how it's been set up. And this is just to speak on the new net billing tariff and why California has gone this direction. If any of you have ever heard of the duck curve, this is continuing to be a big problem as we see solar penetration rates increase throughout California. We see this in Hawaii. We see this in many states with a high solar adoption rate, is that everybody's producing power during the day. So the grid need during the daytime plummets because there's so much renewables and so much solar getting fed onto the grid, or at least reducing the demand on the grid. And then in the early evening hours when the sun goes down, boom, now everybody comes home from work and turns on their AC or turns on their lights, and the demand shoots up. And so that's what they're trying to control here by going to this net billing tariff and really making batteries much more common. They want people to export in those hours, and that's typically when you see the blackouts. That's when you see the hours that have the highest export rates. It's between 6 and 8 p.m. when people have the most need, and that's when you look at the time of use rates. That's when between 4 and 9, or typically 5 and 8 p.m. That's when the rates are the highest in those hours. So that's what arbitrage does. You store it during the day, you discharge it into the early evening hours usually, and pretty much you just as much as your house pulls, it just depends on that determines how long the battery lasts. So if you're using 3 kilowatts at any given time, that's going to pull 3 kilowatt hours, right, for that time frame, and it's just going to run it until it drains, basically. So that's the whole point of arbitrage. I honestly forget the original question now, but just to go over arbitrage, that's what we're talking about. And again, the goal is use the stored battery. Don't use the high peak rates, or discharge the battery and get paid the high export rates. That's the whole point behind arbitrage. There is no backup capability. Yes, your house will lose power if the grid goes down and you have a battery for arbitrage only. I think that was the original question. So, Matt or Eric, anything to add on that piece?
No, that's correct. It's installed without the appropriate islanding equipment that would allow you to kind of grid form when the grid goes down. So.
All right, our next question is from Jason, and that is, if we only have one Tesla battery, can a household use the backup energy stored in the battery, but simultaneously run the AC system? Who wants that one?
Yeah, it's physically possible, but it's the AC system is going to use most of what the Powerwall can put out. So if you're looking at off-grid where Powerwall is your only power source, that air conditioner and the power source is limited, right? So that air conditioner is going to take up most of what that can produce, which means if they start turning on lights all over the house, they start running a vacuum cleaner, there's a good chance they're actually going to collapse the system.
And Eric, could you speak when you say, because I think this is an important difference that is important to talk about. So could you talk about for a second the difference between storage capacity and output, and what you mean by collapse the system?
Right. So the Powerwall itself is basically a 5K inverter output, right? So what that means is it can put out roughly 20 amps. So if you have an air conditioner that requires 15 amps to run, it's going to take those 15 amps from the Powerwall, which leaves you with 5 amps for the rest of the house. If you go to 6, 7, 8 amps on top of your 15 for the air conditioner, the Powerwall is going to sense, hey, this house is trying to pull more current from me than I can actually output. When it sees that, that's actually a concern, so it'll actually shut down the Powerwall, which means now none of the house has power. The issue with air conditioners specifically is they're what's called an automatic load. They're controlled by your thermostat. So the Powerwall will shut down. It'll give it a few minutes to try to clear that overcurrent, and then it'll reinitialize itself. It'll turn back on. and then more than likely, if the homeowner is not home to shut the AC off, you're now going to go back into, there's an overcurrent, let me shut down. So your Powerwall is going to do that a few times, and then eventually it will give up and it won't power back on until the next day. Avoiding that scenario is specifically why a lot of times a air conditioner is triggering that second Powerwall, right? Because we want to be sure that that customer has enough to run their AC if they want it and it meets all the qualifications, but also has enough left over that they can actually run other electrical circuits in the house, be it their refrigerator, their bathroom lights, master bedroom, without actually shutting it down so that they lose power to everything.
Yeah, that's an awesome explanation and super important point for everybody out there. Again, when you're talking batteries, and specifically when you're talking backup batteries, there's two main components, as I was talking about. There's how much you can power at once, and then there's how long you can power it for. And that's one of the big reasons that we have the storage guide, is because before we had it, and even today this happens, sales reps, homeowners don't necessarily know the limitations of the batteries, right? So, you guys have been out there in the past selling a whole home with a central AC unit on one battery. And the reality is that's just not going to work. You're not going to be able to power the whole house, certainly, and typically even half of the house in those scenarios. So that's why we ask those questions to determine, what do you want to back up? We make some assumptions based on what you select, and we say, okay, based on those assumptions, here's how many batteries you need. The goal there is not to undersize your battery system and sell too few batteries based on what they want to power. So even if they are using the battery system to back up their whole home, and let's say, just for the sake of argument, there's no AC, let's say it's a smaller home and it has one battery on it, that doesn't mean that they can just automatically turn everything in the house on at once. If they do that, you might hit that capacity limit and do what Eric just said. Or even if it does work, what's going to happen is you're using so much power that the battery is just going to not last very long. All right. So important consideration, right? Even, it's how much you can power at once. That's typically measured in kilowatts, right? And for those of you in markets with demand charges, you're probably familiar with this. So it's how much you can power, and then for how long. So if you're powering, let's just say you have a 10 kilowatt hour battery bank and using 2.5 kilowatts worth of energy worth of demand at once, that's going to last you 4 hours, right? 10 divided by 2.5. That's kind of how the math works out. So just keep that in mind. Two different considerations, important to differentiate them.
Appreciate those great answers, everybody. So our next question is, if a client would like more than 4 batteries and needs more to their usage, are we able to sell more than 4 batteries to them?
I can take that. So there are a couple different restrictions and limitations. There are the manufacturer maximum limitations in Powerwalls. You can only have 10 Powerwalls per gateway. SolarEdge, you can now have, I believe, up to 3 batteries for 3 inverters, so up to 9 total batteries. But there are other considerations. The most concerning is the grid and whether the grid can support that. So we have to do some extensive testing to make sure that location. And there's also some building code and potential staffing concerns. Once you get over to a certain system size in locations, it triggers some additional requirements. For instance, in Massachusetts, over 20 kilowatt hours kind of introduces the full building code requirements that are quite restrictive and a challenge there. So short answer is yes, you can sell more, but there will be more considerations we have to look at from a design standpoint and to make sure that system can be built in that way.
Thanks, Matt. Sorry for hitting you back to back here. Our next question is probably more for you, and that is, what is the best way to determine how many batteries a homeowner would need for a whole home backup if they have more or different circuits than what's displayed on the Lightspeed storage guide?
Sure. So just want to be really clear, the storage guide is just that. It's a guide. It is not a universal, specific, end all be all. It's a suggestion, but to a point that Rob made, you're looking at 2 things. You're looking at so how much and then for how long. So once you get past that, how much is not too much of an issue. Like 3 batteries should be able to power any loads kind of that are likely to come on Sunday. So then when you get to these larger systems, you're looking at kind of how if you're in the home with the customer and they have their utility bill. I love to say, hey, let's look at your total usage. You can take the total usage, whether it be monthly, and kind of divide that by 30 to get your daily usage. And then you can look at the various system sizes and say, okay, two power walls are 27 kilowatt hours. How much are you using on average, say during the summer? That's when you want to make sure that the system's working properly. And you can look at your average daily usage and how much capacity you have to understand how long that system's going to work if you have your kind of normal usage patterns. So that's a good rule of thumb to look at sizing a battery and be able to give the customer a better estimate of how long the system's going to be able to work in a whole home situation.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Our next question is a pretty quick one. Do we offer end-phase batteries?
I should probably take this one too. I'll go back to back to back. We don't offer it. I've been evaluating their next gen. I believe it's their Gen 3 battery. I don't know that will be something that we offer. I also saw a question about Powerwall third generation. That's also something that I've heard is out there. We have not been evaluating that yet, but for the time being, we don't have any intentions of expanding our current offerings.
All right. This one is looks like a 4-part question, so I apologize for the person who has to grab this one. What is the expected lifespan of batteries used for arbitrage? Seems like the daily use will absolutely wreck the lifespan. Also, for those customers concerned about end of life for battery, what happens when that battery dies?
I might have to take this one too.
So sorry.
Yeah, no. So typically, all of these batteries are evaluated from warranted from 6,000 to 10,000 cycles. They are intended for daily cycling. There aren't any major concerns with daily cycling. We don't, the warranty does not change whether you cycle it every day or you only run it once a month when the power blips. So the good thing about the battery chemistries that we're seeing on the market right now, that is not a major concern. I should have left that question out. What was the other part of it?
I got it coming right back here.
Oh, recycling. That is a really interesting question. One that I'm particularly interested in. We've seen a growing number of kind of building out recycling facilities. So as we see the electrification of our vehicles and the increase in energy storage in the home, I think that there's going to be widespread recycling facilities that receive that equipment at the end of life.
All right, thanks, Matt. Hopefully we can give you a break on this one. I think this one's for Rob. Can you combine the Powerwall for blackouts with a SolarEdge battery for arbitrage?
So I think it's important to note that if you have, so the Powerwall is adjustable in terms of the settings. So you can actually kind of do both with the Powerwall. You can set it to cycle daily down to, first of all, you can set it to cycle daily, period, if you wanted to. But the other thing that you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but you can specify, a reserve amount or like a discharge amount. So if you want to cycle daily but still leave 50% of your battery capacity there in case of a grid outage, you can do that. So you don't necessarily need to mix and match batteries. You can set up a storage battery to kind of have an arbitrage, setup if you want to use it that way, which, for somebody in California on a time of use rate, for example, probably would be a good idea. You can save money in those time of use rates. So, Matt, I want to keep notes there.
That's exactly right. And frankly, Tesla has a to adjust those settings by the customer. So, as we said in the presentation, a backup system, storage system can do both backup and arbitrage. But the biggest difference is the Powerwall. Because it's AC coupled, there's additional equipment that has to be installed when you put a Powerwall in, which means additional costs. And when we're looking at what's the most cost-effective way we can introduce arbitrage with this new rate structure, we want the least amount of equipment, the least amount of costs, and that's why we're looking at that DC coupled system that doesn't require the additional equipment, and what we're looking at right now is SolarEdge.
So I mean, I'll Mark, if you want, I can just pick off some of these other questions. I think maybe a little bit of a rapid fire.
That sounds great. You want me to bring them up on screen, or just do you want to hit them from?
I mean, if you can, as I kind of start, I'll just kind of crank through some of these. So let's see. In terms of, we have a question here that asks, can't you still use the panels for power in grid down with an arbitrage battery, albeit for limited appliance usage? So the answer to that is definitely no. So unless you have a backup battery and it's set for a backup configuration, your solar system and any battery would not work. Okay, so this is a definitive answer. I want to make sure there's no miscommunications out here about this. If you have a solar system and it does not have a backup battery, you cannot use that solar system when the grid goes down, period, no matter what, right? For those of you that were around, maybe it was about a year ago now, we had the, Matt, what was the Enphase offering there? That
Sunlight backup.
Yeah, Sunlight backup. We nixed that. That is not a good solution. That basically allowed you to island or kind of create a microgrid just with your PV, and it's just not a good option. There's a lot of complaints, and just it didn't meet customers' expectations in a big way, and it really just, the equipment wasn't there yet. So the definitive answer to this is no. Unless you have a backup battery, you do not have power when the grid goes out, period. Okay, simple as that. Anything to add to that?
I sneak something in real quick. One thing that we haven't talked about here at all is that we haven't finalized pricing on the arbitrage option. It will be considerably lower than the $12,000 SolarEdge backup option, because the SolarEdge backup option, as currently priced for the first battery at $12,000, includes all of the equipment necessary to do both backup and arbitrage. Once we finalize that and that gets published, it will be considerably lower than that. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that a little bit, because I think there are some questions about the arbitrage offerings too and what's going to be available. So both Freedom and Sunrun are planning to offer arbitrage offerings in the not so distant future. Don't know the exact time frames yet, but so somebody asked in the chat, is there in Splat, will you be able to choose one or the other? I don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet in Splat, but the answer is definitely yes. Likewise, in Storage Guide, once we introduce the arbitrage only option, probably what's going to happen is there's going to be a preceding question, which is, are you intending to use the battery for backup or not? And that's going to influence the rest of the Storage Guide. Again, don't have that all mapped out yet, but basically, like, moving forward, when this is an option, you're going to have to tell us, is this arbitrage only or is this backup? And then we'll go from there, and that'll, of course, influence the pricing. So it will be a pretty different thing. And so just some other questions here that I'm seeing in the chat. This one's from Nate. I'm not sure that I follow the question entirely, but it says, since arbitrage is zero storage, does that mean inverters are being just disappeared? Does that mean inverters are being designed to follow time of use, or is that referring to one battery and not being enough to store energy? So just to clarify, there is storage with an arbitrage battery offering. It's just not meant for backup. Okay, so you are going to store your battery. Again, it's just going to cycle daily and charge, basically like discharge throughout the day, once a day, more or less. Okay, Mark, could you pop that one up one more time? There's another part that I want to address there. And then in terms of how it discharges, this is also a part that, I think, Matt, you can probably add some color here too, but, depending on the battery system, there are going to be different settings that you can set, and it's really going to be, okay, when do you want to discharge your battery or export your battery based on when it's most advantageous to use. So that's going to be a kind of a variable based on the customer's rate plan and when they're incentivized, when the incentives are highest to discharge their battery. So again, typically that's going to be like right now, for example, if you had a battery in the time of use rates in California, as I said before, you're going to want to discharge between typically at 5 and 8 or 4 to 9 when the peak rates are highest. If it's in the net billing tariff in California on the export rates, it's going to be about the same time. So that's typically going to be the sweet spot is early to mid evening hours. That's when the rates are typically highest and the export rates are typically highest. But all of that is adjustable in the battery depending on where you live and what you're trying to accomplish.
All right, we have a NEM3 question. We're going to pop up on screen now. Will adding a battery change the system to any?
No, it will not. As long as you're not adding, we covered this a little bit in the last one, as long as you're not adding PV, you can add a battery and it would not impact the net metering plan.
All right.
And any other rapid fire ones?